Her simple refusal to give up a bus seat ignited a revolution, sparking the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks is hailed as an icon of courage, a symbol of defiance. But what if her most enduring struggle began after that historic moment? What if the woman who inspired millions spent years facing profound personal hardship, unemployment, harassment, and financial destitution, precisely because of her bravery? Imagine a hero, celebrated in history books, living a life of quiet struggle and continuous sacrifice, far from the spotlight. This is the untold story of Rosa Parks' unseen battles, the psychological cost of courage, and the unwavering resilience that sustained her long after the headlines faded. Welcome to Behind the Legend, where we explore the hidden truths behind history's most iconic figures. In today's video, we're diving into the life of Rosa Parks, a name synonymous with courage and defiance. You probably know her for the moment when she refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus, an act that helped ignite the civil rights movement. But today, we're going beyond that single moment, exploring the struggles she faced in the aftermath of her brave decision. In this psychological exploration, we'll look at the profound toll Rosa Parks experienced after becoming a symbol of resistance. Her life wasn't all heroism and recognition. In fact, the years following her act of courage were marked by deep personal challenges, job loss, harassment, financial hardship, and the immense pressure of being thrust into the public eye. We'll reveal the unseen battles she fought quietly, showing the resilience and perseverance of a woman who kept fighting, despite the personal cost. Rosa Parks' story isn't just about a single moment of bravery, it's about the sustained courage and inner strength that defined her life. Rosa Parks didn't become an icon on the bus in 1955. Her moment of courage didn't spring out of nowhere. Instead, it was the culmination of years of activism, personal resilience, and a deeply ingrained sense of justice that had been growing since her childhood. Born in 1913 in segregated Alabama, Rosa Parks grew up in a world where racism was an ever-present force, shaping every aspect of her life. Parks was raised by her mother, Leona, and her brother, Sylvester, in Pine Level, Alabama, after her parents separated. From a young age, Rosa witnessed and experienced the harsh realities of segregation. It was clear that the world around her was divided, white people on one side, black people on another, with little room for mobility or change. Parks' family was deeply religious and imbued her with a strong sense of morality, duty, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Her education in resisting segregation began early. Parks attended Montgomery Industrial School for Girls, where she was exposed to progressive ideas and a sense of empowerment that would later fuel her activism. Rosa's exposure to injustice was not limited to the classroom or the segregated streets. Her experiences with inequality would eventually spark a quiet but unshakable resolve to fight for equality. During her young adulthood, Rosa joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP, where she served as a secretary. The NAACP provided her with the tools, knowledge, and community support she would later draw upon in her fight for justice. This wasn't her first foray into activism. Rosa had already been involved in various efforts, including challenging the system that kept her people oppressed. She became increasingly aware of the personal costs of standing up against the segregated system, but it only fueled her commitment to change. Rosa's psychological resolve was built over years of witnessing the suffering and indignities of segregation. It wasn't one single event that ignited her defiance, but the ongoing accumulation of these injustices that shaped her inner strength. Rosa Parks was not just a woman who one day decided to refuse to give up her seat. She was a woman who, throughout her life, had come to see standing up for justice as an essential part of who she was. It was this resolve, shaped by years of personal observation and quiet resistance, that would carry her through the immense psychological challenges she would soon face. When she sat down on that bus, she wasn't just acting in defiance of a single incident, she was acting on years of frustration, years of observing systemic injustice, and years of quiet preparation. The deep-seated conviction Parks had cultivated over her life was something that would serve her well after her famous act of defiance. But it would also expose her to personal sacrifices that many do not consider when they think of the great civil rights leaders. What followed her courageous act was not the immediate victory she might have hoped for, but a series of trials that tested her resilience to the core. On December 1, 1955, Rosa Parks sat down on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and made a choice that would change the course of history. She refused to give up her seat to a white passenger, defying the city's segregated bus laws. This act of courage was neither impulsive nor spontaneous in the traditional sense. While it may have appeared to be a simple act of defiance, it was, in fact, the result of years of observing injustice and building inner resolve. But even though Rosa Parks had been mentally preparing for such a moment, the psychological impact of her decision was profound and immediate. The events of that day, and the aftermath that followed, would challenge her in ways she had never anticipated. The arrest was a shocking moment. For Parks, it was an affirmation that, in the eyes of the law, she was still seen as inferior, a second-class citizen. Yet, at the same time, it was a transformative moment, a physical manifestation of her commitment to justice. The act of being arrested for something so simple, yet so profound, marked the beginning of a new chapter in Parks' life. Suddenly, she was thrust into the national spotlight. The immediate consequences of her act were swift. The Montgomery bus boycott, which Parks helped to ignite, became the catalyst for a larger movement, a movement that would grow far beyond her expectations. But while this was a time of collective action and momentum, it was also a time of personal hardship and psychological strain for Parks. She was suddenly thrust into a role she had never sought, a role as a symbol of the civil rights movement. Psychologically, becoming a symbol had profound implications for Parks. She was no longer just Rosa Parks, the quiet seamstress from Montgomery. She had become the embodiment of resistance. But with this transformation came an intense pressure to live up to the expectations that society placed upon her. The weight of being an icon was not one she sought, nor was it one she was entirely prepared to carry. Her defiance triggered an outpouring of support, but also a barrage of hostility. She was harassed, threatened, and ostracized by the very system she had challenged. In addition to facing public scrutiny, Parks also had to contend with the personal toll of being a symbol. Her private life, once ordinary, was now being exposed to public judgment, and every action she took was scrutinized. While Rosa Parks' act of defiance on that bus sparked a movement that would eventually lead to monumental changes in American society, the immediate repercussions for Parks herself were devastating. The bus boycott led to a direct response from the city and the larger Southern political structure, but the most immediate and personal cost Parks faced was the loss of her job. Parks had been working as a seamstress for a local department store in Montgomery before her arrest, and her act of courage cost her that job. The store's management, under the pressure of segregationist forces, was quick to let her go. However, losing her job was just the beginning of a much larger personal struggle. Rosa Parks, once an anonymous seamstress, had now become a figurehead for the civil rights movement, a symbol of resistance. While this brought her praise from some quarters, it also attracted intense hostility from others, leading to personal and financial hardship that would follow her for years. In the months following her arrest, Parks found it nearly impossible to secure another job in Montgomery. The city was a hotbed of racial tension, and white business owners were reluctant to hire someone associated with the civil rights struggle, particularly someone as prominent as Parks. She faced a type of social and economic blacklisting. It wasn't just the economic hardship of being without a job, it was the constant fear and harassment that followed her every move. Parks was regularly threatened with violence. Her home was bombed, her phone rang with threatening calls, and she was subjected to constant intimidation. At times, she felt the weight of isolation, a woman who had taken a stand and now had to bear the emotional and psychological toll of that decision. She was not only financially unstable but also emotionally burdened, often living in constant fear for her safety. The psychological strain of these early years was immense. To go from being a private citizen to a national symbol of defiance against racial injustice was a profound shift in Parks' life. While many celebrated her bravery, she often found herself struggling with the reality of her circumstances. She had always been a quiet, humble woman who sought dignity in her life and work. But now, she had to navigate a public life of activism, where her every move and every decision was subject to public scrutiny. In addition to the threats and intimidation, Parks was also grappling with the stress of financial insecurity. She had lost her job, and finding stable employment was difficult. The Montgomery bus boycott, which was in full swing, was a vital part of the civil rights movement, but it did not offer Parks the financial stability she so desperately needed. The burden of financial insecurity weighed heavily on her and her husband, Raymond Parks, who was also involved in the movement. The couple's modest means, combined with the constant stress of living under threat, placed an emotional and psychological toll on both of them. During this time, Parks relied on the support of the movement, the local community, and family. But there were moments of deep personal sacrifice, moments when she wondered how much more she could endure. The act that had made her an icon of courage had also plunged her into a life of profound struggle. In reflecting on this period of hardship, we see the incredible resilience of Rosa Parks. Her courage on that bus was the spark that ignited the civil rights movement, but the price she paid was immense. The emotional toll of unemployment, harassment, and constant threats could easily have shattered a lesser person, but Rosa Parks continued to push forward, driven by her deep moral conviction and belief in justice. This period of financial hardship also underscored the psychological cost of activism. While Parks became a symbol of defiance, she had to pay a personal cost. Financial instability, constant fear, and the threat of violence all created a psychological weight that she carried with quiet dignity. Her story is a reminder that courage, while transformative for society, often comes at a very personal cost, a cost that is not always recognized in the broader narrative of history. Rosa Parks' ability to survive this period of hardship demonstrates an extraordinary internal resilience. While the world celebrated her for her courage on the bus, few knew the depths of the emotional and financial sacrifices she endured in the aftermath. Her continued struggle for justice, despite the personal toll, speaks to the unyielding determination that defined her life. After Rosa Parks' act of defiance, she became not just a local hero but a national symbol of resistance. Her quiet, determined refusal to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery was transformed into the face of the civil rights movement, representing not just a woman's courage but the collective struggle of millions of African Americans against systemic racism. However, with this transformation into a public symbol came an immense psychological burden. Rosa Parks no longer had control over her own narrative, and her life became an ongoing series of public appearances, speeches, and expectations. The weight of being an icon is something few can truly understand, and it is often overlooked when we celebrate figures like Rosa Parks. While many lauded her as a hero, the toll of living up to that image was immense. She was no longer just Rosa, the quiet seamstress from Montgomery. She was now Rosa Parks, the face of defiance, the hero of a movement. This sudden and relentless pressure changed every aspect of her life. The public's expectations were high. People wanted to see her as the embodiment of unwavering courage and strength, and every time she stepped out in public, she was expected to live up to this image. But beneath that public persona was a woman who was still facing significant personal struggles. Her privacy was gone. She could no longer live an anonymous life or make decisions free from public scrutiny. Whether she was traveling to give a speech or simply going about her daily life, the weight of her new identity was always with her. There were constant demands on her time, and she was expected to speak on behalf of the entire civil rights movement, which placed an additional emotional and psychological strain on her. The exhaustion of constant travel, speaking engagements, and appearances soon took a toll on Parks. She was expected to serve as the perfect symbol of the movement, but the pressure of always having to be the face of resistance wore her down. As someone who had always valued privacy and a quiet life, the constant public exposure was a difficult adjustment. For a woman who had spent much of her life resisting injustice quietly, to be thrust into such a visible role was overwhelming. Parks was often asked to embody an ideal of courage, perseverance, and unwavering strength. But as a human being, she wasn't immune to the exhaustion, doubt, and fear that accompany constant public scrutiny. It's easy to imagine the emotional toll of always being expected to represent not just her personal beliefs, but the aspirations of an entire movement. Moreover, as the symbol of the civil rights movement, Parks found herself in a difficult position, constantly under the spotlight, but unable to fully shape the narrative around her. The media, activists, and even the public created a version of her that didn't always align with who she was or how she wanted to live her life. This disconnect between the public's expectations of her and her own internal sense of self created a psychological tension that would last throughout her life. As time went on, Parks struggled with this dichotomy, her own desire for privacy, normalcy, and quiet activism, versus the larger-than-life image that had been created for her. She was constantly called upon to represent ideals that were bigger than her own personal desires, and the weight of that responsibility was emotionally taxing. She wasn't just the woman who refused to give up her seat, she was now a living embodiment of the struggle for civil rights, expected to speak, act, and live as the symbol others had created for her. Living as an icon also meant that Parks had to navigate the emotional challenge of being part of something bigger than herself, all while dealing with her personal hardships, financial instability, constant harassment, and the lack of privacy. The emotional labor required to balance these competing demands, living up to the role of an icon while managing her personal struggles, was immense. Her courage wasn't just tested in public moments of resistance, it was tested every day in how she navigated the tension between her personal life and the weight of the public's expectations. Yet, despite the immense pressure, Parks continued to show up. She continued to give speeches, to travel, and to advocate for civil rights, even when she felt drained and exhausted. She understood that her role in the movement was bigger than herself, and she continued to serve with quiet dignity, despite the emotional toll it took on her. It's important to recognize that the burden of symbolism was not something Parks chose. While her act of defiance on the bus was a conscious decision, the pressure to become the face of the movement was thrust upon her. It was a role that she accepted, but not without the psychological cost. The emotional toll of being a symbol of resistance, while simultaneously dealing with personal hardship and loss of privacy, is often underestimated when we recount her story. As the public and personal pressure mounted, Rosa Parks faced increasing difficulties in Montgomery, her hometown. The harassment, the threats, and the continual financial hardship were unrelenting. After years of enduring these challenges and seeing little improvement in her circumstances, Parks made the difficult decision to leave Montgomery and move to Detroit in 1957. This was not a decision made lightly. It meant leaving behind her home, the city where she had lived for most of her life, and all the people who had supported her. But it was a necessary step to seek both physical and psychological relief. Parks' move to Detroit marked a new chapter in her life, but it also came with its own set of psychological struggles. Relocating meant starting over, leaving the life she had known and the community that had helped sustain her during her years of activism. The idea of starting anew is often idealized, but for Parks, it was more of a survival strategy. The relentless public attention and harassment she faced in Montgomery had left her exhausted, both physically and emotionally. In Detroit, she hoped to find a place where she could continue her activism without the same level of personal threat and financial instability. In Detroit, Parks found work as a secretary for Congressman John Conyers, which provided her with a stable income, something she had been deprived of for years in Montgomery. The financial stability was a relief, but the emotional toll of her past experiences continued to linger. She was still deeply affected by the trauma of her public life in Montgomery, the harassment, the fear, and the constant sense of being watched. These psychological scars didn't just vanish when she moved to a new city. In addition to dealing with the emotional aftermath of her earlier years, Parks also faced the challenge of redefining her role in the movement. Detroit was an important hub for civil rights activism, but it was also different from Montgomery. In Detroit, she was no longer the symbolic figurehead of the boycott. She was part of a larger movement, working behind the scenes, focusing on the day-to-day work of activism rather than the headline-making moments. While this shift allowed her some space from the intense public scrutiny she had faced before, it also meant that she was no longer at the forefront of the movement. This shift in roles required a psychological adjustment. Parks had spent years being celebrated as the face of the civil rights movement, but in Detroit, she found herself working in a more subdued capacity. While she remained dedicated to the cause, this period of quieter, less public activism was emotionally complex. For one, Parks had to reconcile her desire for privacy with the continuing demands of activism. The quiet work she did in Detroit, often unseen by the public, was no less important, but it lacked the immediate rewards or recognition that came with her earlier role. Additionally, Parks had to navigate the psychological toll of being physically distant from the heart of the struggle. In Montgomery, she had been right in the thick of the fight, but in Detroit, the struggle felt somewhat more distant, even as she continued to contribute in her own way. She found herself grappling with the feeling of being an outsider within the movement, someone who had helped ignite a revolution but was now working on the periphery of the larger fight for civil rights. Despite these challenges, Parks did not stop fighting. She continued to advocate for racial equality, women's rights, and the broader civil rights cause. But in Detroit, the pressure of constant public recognition and the emotional costs of her activism began to subside, even though they never fully disappeared. The psychological toll of her earlier struggles lingered. She continued to face financial difficulties at times, and the emotional scars from her years of public scrutiny were slow to heal. During this period, Parks also faced personal health challenges. In addition to the stress of her activism and the emotional toll of her earlier years, she began experiencing health problems. The combination of years of stress, constant threats, and physical exhaustion had a lasting impact on her health, and Parks was forced to navigate the psychological and physical challenges of aging while continuing to fight for justice. The years in Detroit were not easy, but they offered Parks a level of stability she had not experienced in Montgomery. Despite the ongoing emotional strain and the complexities of her new role, she continued her advocacy work with the same quiet determination that had characterized her earlier efforts. Parks' decision to move was not an easy one, but it ultimately allowed her to continue her activism in a less public and less physically threatening way, giving her the opportunity to find new forms of resilience. Though the financial hardships and personal challenges continued in Detroit, Rosa Parks' ability to endure them, and to continue her activism in a quieter, more supportive role, demonstrates the sustained strength of her character. The shift from being the face of the civil rights movement to a more behind-the-scenes role was difficult for her, but it speaks to her ongoing commitment to justice and her ability to adapt to new circumstances, even after the spotlight had faded. Through this period of struggle, Parks continued to embody the quiet resilience that had marked her earlier life. Her decision to remain dedicated to the movement, even when her role had shifted and her personal challenges continued, is a testament to her enduring commitment to racial equality. She never ceased to fight for justice, but she also learned to navigate the complex emotional and psychological terrain that comes with a lifetime of activism. As the years passed, Rosa Parks' life became less about the headline-making moments of defiance and more about the quiet, ongoing fight for justice that she waged for decades. The iconic image of her sitting on that bus, refusing to give up her seat, was a catalyst for monumental change. Yet, as we dig deeper into her story, it becomes clear that her true resilience wasn't in the moment of courage on December 1, 1955, but in the quiet dignity with which she continued to fight for what was right, often without fanfare and always at great personal cost. Rosa Parks' legacy is one of endurance, persistence, and an unwavering belief in justice, but it also serves as a powerful reminder that the psychological toll of activism is often not visible. The years following her pivotal act were not marked by national celebrations or accolades. Instead, they were filled with personal struggles that many overlooked. Yet, through it all, Parks never wavered in her commitment to the cause. One of the most powerful aspects of her legacy is the way she continued to embody resilience in a world that often overlooked the invisible struggles of those who fight for social justice. For many, Parks is an icon of courage, but the deeper truth is that her courage wasn't just a one-time act. It was a continuous effort, a day-in and day-out fight for racial equality, even when the limelight had faded and the world moved on to the next headline. In the years following the bus boycott, Parks remained involved in activism, though her role had shifted. She focused on issues like voter registration, youth education, and community organizing. While her name remained synonymous with the civil rights movement, her activism was more often behind the scenes. This quieter, sustained form of work is often overshadowed by her moment on the bus, but it is just as important in understanding the true cost of her courage. What makes Parks' story so compelling, and universally relevant, is the fact that, while she became a symbol of defiance and justice, she was not immune to the daily struggles of life. In fact, those daily struggles likely made her more grounded, more empathetic, and more committed to the cause of justice. She understood better than most that true change does not come from a single moment of defiance. It comes from sustained, quiet efforts that require perseverance and resilience, often in the face of overwhelming adversity. Even after moving to Detroit, where she continued her work, Rosa Parks' life was not free from hardship. Though she had a more stable job as a secretary for Congressman John Conyers, financial difficulties persisted, and health problems began to emerge. Parks' financial and physical struggles continued for much of her life, but her commitment to the movement remained unwavering. She understood that activism was not just about being at the front of a protest or giving a speech. It was about remaining steadfast in the face of adversity, and continuing the work, no matter how small or unnoticed it might seem. In addition to her personal sacrifices, Parks also faced emotional burdens that many might overlook. As an iconic figure, she was often expected to live up to an idealized version of herself. A version that was flawless, fearless, and without personal doubt or conflict. Yet, the true measure of her strength was not in her ability to embody this image but in her ability to stay true to herself while carrying the weight of being a symbol of justice. The expectations placed upon her by the public were intense, and the emotional labor of constantly representing a movement in a way that matched the public's vision of heroism must have been exhausting. But Parks handled this with quiet grace, continuing her work and enduring the private challenges with dignity. Parks' post-heroic years were a testament to the quiet dignity that she maintained despite the heavy emotional toll. She did not demand recognition for her continued work, nor did she seek fame. She simply continued to fight for justice, to support those who needed it, and to quietly inspire those around her. Her ability to maintain that sense of inner strength, despite years of personal sacrifice, was the true definition of resilience. In the public eye, her image as the mother of the movement was solidified, but in reality, her legacy was about far more than just that iconic moment on the bus. It was about the years of hard work, sacrifice, and resilience that followed it. Rosa Parks never stopped being an advocate for social justice. Whether it was through her continued involvement with the NAACP, her work on issues like youth education and voter rights, or her quiet but impactful advocacy for racial equality, she remained steadfast in her commitment. But it's important to recognize that this sustained activism came with immense psychological costs. There were times when she likely questioned whether it was worth it, whether the sacrifices she had made were truly going to lead to the kind of change she had hoped for. The emotional toll of being constantly in the public eye, of carrying the weight of an entire movement on her shoulders, must have been profound. Yet, she continued, quietly, persistently, and with incredible strength. Parks' legacy, therefore, is not just about her singular moment of courage, it's about her continued commitment to justice, her unwavering resilience, and the quiet determination that carried her through a lifetime of struggle. Her story reminds us that true heroes are not defined by a single act but by the way they continue to fight for what is right, even when the world is no longer watching. Rosa Parks' story provides profound lessons not just in courage, but in the quiet resilience required to sustain activism over a lifetime. While she is widely celebrated for her iconic act of defiance on the bus, the true measure of her strength lies in her ability to navigate years of hardship, from personal financial struggles to the emotional toll of public symbolism. Her journey teaches us that heroism is not always flashy or glamorous. Often, it is found in the quiet, steadfast commitment to a cause, even when the rewards are not immediate or visible. One of the most universal principles we can learn from Rosa Parks' life is the importance of sustained resilience in the face of adversity. Her ability to continue fighting for justice, even when the world moved on from her famous act, shows us that true strength lies in persistence. It's easy to celebrate a single moment of courage, but Rosa's life teaches us that heroism often exists in the long, difficult days when there's no applause, no recognition, and no guarantee of success. Her story also reminds us of the importance of maintaining our sense of identity and purpose, especially when faced with external pressures. As Parks became a public symbol, she was constantly expected to represent an ideal, an embodiment of courage and strength that matched the movement's collective aspirations. The emotional labor involved in constantly living up to this image must have been exhausting. Yet, through it all, Parks remained grounded in her values. Her resilience wasn't just about enduring hardship, it was about staying true to herself and her commitment to justice, even when that meant sacrificing her personal privacy, comfort, and stability. Parks' ability to continue her activism despite the toll it took on her physical, emotional, and financial well-being is a powerful lesson in the necessity of purpose in times of adversity. She was driven by a larger vision of racial equality and justice, a vision that transcended her personal struggles. Her life teaches us that having a clear sense of purpose can help us persevere through even the most challenging circumstances. When we know why we're fighting, and when our cause is bigger than ourselves, we can endure hardships that might otherwise break us. Another key lesson from Rosa Parks' life is the importance of community and support. While Parks was a leader in her own right, she was also deeply connected to a network of activists, family, and supporters who helped sustain her through difficult times. Her quiet resilience was bolstered by the strength of those around her. Her story teaches us that, in times of personal or collective struggle, we cannot underestimate the power of community. Whether through mentorship, collaboration, or simply providing emotional support, our networks are essential in helping us navigate the challenges life throws at us. Finally, Park's life underscores the psychological importance of self-care for activists and those fighting for justice. The demands of public activism, combined with personal hardships, can take an emotional toll that is often invisible to the public eye. Rosa Parks' ability to persevere, despite these hidden costs, highlights the importance of nurturing our mental and emotional well-being even while fighting for external change. True resilience is not just about enduring adversity, it's also about recognizing when we need rest, support, and space to recharge. Park's story reminds us that the greatest struggles for justice are not always about single moments of courage, but about the quiet acts of persistence, the resilience to keep moving forward in the face of setbacks, and the willingness to keep working for change, even when the world around us is silent. Her legacy is not just one of defiance on a bus, but of sustained, quiet courage throughout her life. Drawing inspiration from Rosa Parks' experiences, we can incorporate lessons on sustained resilience, activism, and self-care into our own lives, especially when we are faced with long-term challenges, resistance, or opposition. Rosa Parks teaches us that resilience isn't about one bold, heroic act. It's about continuing the fight over the long haul. When we face long-term challenges, whether in our personal lives, careers, or social causes, we should focus on staying consistent. Small, consistent actions over time often have a more profound impact than singular, dramatic gestures. Whether it's advocating for justice, building personal relationships, or pursuing a career goal, embracing persistence is key to making meaningful progress. Park's commitment to racial equality and justice drove her through some of her most difficult moments. When facing setbacks or hardships, it's essential to connect to our purpose. What is the larger vision or goal we are working toward? Identifying and focusing on this greater purpose can help us push through times of doubt, fatigue, or adversity. This sense of purpose can sustain us in moments when external recognition or rewards are lacking. Rosa Parks didn't face her struggles alone. She was supported by a network of like-minded individuals, including her family, the civil rights movement, and her community. When facing challenges in our own lives, whether personal or professional, we should recognize the value of a strong support system. Cultivate relationships that offer emotional support, practical help, and encouragement. Leaning on others is not a sign of weakness but an essential part of sustaining long-term resilience. Being in a public role, especially one defined by activism or leadership, can come with emotional and physical demands that wear us down over time. Rosa Parks' story is a reminder that we must prioritize self-care, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Taking time to rest, reflect, and recharge is crucial to maintaining our long-term effectiveness and well-being. Activism, just like any other form of work, requires balance. It's essential to take care of ourselves as we work to take care of others. As Parks became a public symbol, she was constantly expected to live up to the image of a hero, strong, unyielding, and fearless. The pressure to meet such expectations is something that many of us can relate to, whether in our work, relationships, or public lives. However, Rosa's example shows us that true strength lies in staying authentic. We don't need to meet the world's expectations of who we should be. We simply need to stay true to our values and the larger goals that guide our actions. By integrating these principles into our own lives, we can cultivate sustained resilience and make meaningful contributions to the causes we care about, whether they are personal, social, or professional. We can learn from Rosa Parks not just by emulating her courage, but by embodying her quiet strength and perseverance, facing adversity with dignity and a deep, unshakable commitment to our beliefs. While Rosa Parks' moment of courage is widely recognized as one of the most iconic events in the civil rights movement, it is essential not to oversimplify her actions or reduce them to a single, tired, moment of resistance. Parks had been deeply involved in the movement long before December 1, 1955, and her act of defiance on the bus was the culmination of years of groundwork and resistance. She had undergone extensive training with the NAACP, which prepared her to respond strategically to racial injustice. Parks' act wasn't a spontaneous act of rebellion, but a carefully considered act of civil disobedience born from years of experience with the realities of segregation. Moreover, the systemic racism Parks and countless others faced did not disappear after her single moment of defiance. The road to equality was, and remains, long and fraught with obstacles. Parks' continued activism in the years after the bus boycott was an acknowledgement that one moment of resistance could not dismantle centuries of entrenched racial discrimination. Parks' life and work remind us that while individual acts of courage are vital, systemic change requires continuous, collective action. Finally, the historical narrative of Rosa Parks has often overlooked the full extent of her personal and financial struggles. While she became an icon, her hardships, both personal and public, are frequently minimized or ignored. By acknowledging the complexities of her life, we can gain a more realistic and profound understanding of the sacrifices made by civil rights activists and the true cost of the fight for justice. Rosa Parks' legendary courage was not confined to a single moment on a bus. It was defined by her sustained resilience, quiet dignity, and unwavering commitment to justice throughout her life. While her defiance sparked a movement, the true measure of her legacy lies in her continued activism, her perseverance in the face of hardship, and her ability to carry the psychological and emotional weight of public symbolism. Her story reveals that true heroism isn't found in a singular act, but in the long, ongoing commitment to fight for what is right, even when the path is difficult and the cost is high. Rosa Parks' story challenges us to reflect on our own capacity for sustained resilience. How can we continue to fight for our beliefs and values, even when the journey is long and the obstacles seem insurmountable? What quiet acts of courage can we embrace in our own lives? Share your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe to Behind the Legend for more deep dives into the human psyche that shaped history. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the life of Rosa Parks, a woman whose courage transcended the moment of her defiance and became a lifetime of quiet, unyielding commitment. Let her story inspire you to find strength in your own quiet acts of resilience, and to continue fighting for justice, even when the road ahead seems long.